Yeah.
Well, while she's on this tour, as I mentioned, preaching about climate change and climate alarmism, and there being this emergency that we all have to be taxed to the grave about, or to counteract somehow taxes will stop wildfires. We have another little clip here from the same Deputy Minister Chrystia Freeland urging Canadians to recognize that climate change is in fact real. It's not this elusive theory. No, it is real, and she wants you to believe it.
I really believe, having just a couple of days ago, being up in northern Alberta in the Peace Country, having met people fleeing forest fires, it just brought home to me in that really personal way how devastating the impact of climate change is. It's not a theory anymore. It's something that so many people are feeling across the country. And earlier this summer, I was in Nova Scotia and saw the impacts of devastating climate events there. So, and I think all Canadians recognize that climate change is real, that it's having an impact on us, and we need to act. And I think as a country, we can take pride in the fact that we are acting. We're taking real action that is making a difference. Our emissions are starting to go down, even as our economy grows. That's exactly what needs to happen. We did something a federal government has never done before, which is we put in place very, very significant electricity tax credits that public utilities can apply for, and so can private ones. And the reason we did that was, yes, to help Canada accomplish the green transition more quickly, but also crucially, and this is there in black and white in the budget, to ensure that even as we were moving towards clean energy, we were going to have enough electricity for the green transition, and that regular Canadians, when they paid their electricity prices, were not feeling any pain.
No, they want us to feel the pain with gas, with the carbon tax, with the fossil fuels, so that we are all forced to transition under this veil of green transition to electricity, which our grids, the infrastructure, I mean, we talk about this regularly on the Rebel platform. There's not enough infrastructure for electricity. It's not as reliable as fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. And this really, it's just her saying that that climate change and global warming is not a theory anymore. Well, when did that happen? When, this is all based on modeling and predictions. It's the exact same stuff that happened, and it really woke people up throughout the COVID hysteria, because they saw, well, you've predicted this, you have this doom and gloom, these doomsday predictions, and they never came to fruition. So what was this based on actual science, or is this all just theorized modeling? And a lot of people started to see that this was all based on the latter, theorized modeling, and there wasn't any science or clear evidence-based decisions that were happening across the board with this narrative, from governments down to institutions, down to the supposed experts that continued to be amplified. So the same thing is very much happening with this climate alarmism. This is all based on theory. It's all based on modeling. It's all doom and gloom. I mean, I'm old enough to remember peak oil. We were supposed to run out of oil. I think it was in the year 2000 or after. And that didn't happen. And there's been the consecutive times in history we can look back to see where these theories never came to fruition. And so for her to come out and say it's not a theory anymore, we know, I'm just so curious. And that would have been, another great question to ask. Well, when did it go from being a theory to a fact? When did that happen? Can you share with us? Where's the study? Where can we find that information? And conflating natural disasters with climate change. I mean, you just need to have a little bit of critical thought to see how this does not make sense and doesn't add up.
Yeah. And it reminds me a little bit of the play on words. People know that the climate changes. It's the alarmism, and not looking at the full picture of how it can be similar back in 50 years ago as it is now, and things like that. And it reminds me of the COVID, when they would say, they would always say anybody who critiqued the measures or whatever thinks that there is no virus going around. And sure, there was a small amount who didn't, but most people were like, no, we just think that natural immunity works and things like that. So they totally dismiss it. But I was, in looking for another report, because of course, BC is getting hit really hard with these fires. I think I shared the link, but I was looking at the BC government's wildfire averages. And this is the current 10-year average. So again, you really get a better picture when you look at more years to see that there is alarmism happening. But even when you look at this chart, you can see that, for example, last year, 2022, there was 1,801 fires. Interestingly, 2020, 670 fires. I guess that was a virus year or something like that. But less people were out. At the top of the chart, it even says that on average, 42% of these are human caused. So it was a very interesting chart. And if you go all the way down, because it shows the hectares that were damaged as well. But if you scroll down and you look at 2009, we had 3,064 fires in BC, which of course affected more hectares than last year. So anyways, it's just, you're right. When did it become that everything that's happening there, every single fire, wildfire is equated to climate change. And that's because that's where the goal goes. And the tax benefit that she sort of mentioned reminds me a lot of how the Liberals, when you talk about inflation, they're like, but we're helping people with dental. It's like they do that one thing that they can keep bringing up to sort of put a Band-Aid on everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, we're going to continue to tax you. And I just wrote a piece up yesterday. It's 45% of the average Canadians, in the average family's income, goes to taxes. 45%.
Yeah.
And so, and we've only seen that increase under the bureaucracy of the Justin Trudeau Liberals. And so, instead of saying we're looking at tax breaks, we're looking to cut back our bureaucracy, it's become too bloated, there's too many bureaucrats, we've inflated their wages. Instead of looking at reasonable and tangible ways to make life more affordable for Canadians, they just continue to increase the tax amount that Canadians pay while throwing these willy-nilly rebates back at you, which don't even at the end of the day cover the exorbitant amount in taxes that we're paying. So I think that's why people are more and more appreciating what Pierre Poilievre's platforming on, which is to bring reason back and logic back into the lives of everyday Canadians. I mean, Conservatives are traditionally the fiscally responsible. Their party platform is really about the hardworking average Canadian, and those are who have been affected the most by the policies and the platform implementations of the Liberals. So I think that now people are really starting to feel it. It's starting to hit them where it hurts, which is in their pocketbooks. And it's left many Canadians wondering, are we getting more bang for our buck as we pay more taxes? Are we really getting a government that is more responsible and delivering more services and so on and so forth? And the writing, I think, is there on the wall that we can see very clearly that is just simply not the case. And it's only going to get worse, sadly, as we move to this idea of net zero and pushing the Agenda 2030. And now it's, I think, being pushed to Agenda 2035 because we can't meet the target goals of 2030 in terms of green energy and renewables because they're just not reliable. There may be environments and climates, and I mean just like your general climate from the difference between northern Alberta and southeastern Ontario, for instance. There's vast climate differences in those jurisdictions. And so when I refer to climate, that's what I'm referring to because that is what it's, that's the textbook definition of climate.
Yeah.
And so there may be climates where these renewables work and they're effective, but it's certainly not up in northern Alberta and BC, which, you have an entire season. I mean, it's always rainy season in BC, it seems. So do you think that solar panels are really going to be an effective way to generate energy that's reliable and consistent enough for people when they need it? And we're seeing more and more that that's just not going to happen. The infrastructure isn't there. And unless we want to continue on this trajectory of being taxed to essentially death, financial ruin, the infrastructure is not going to be there. So I don't know why the Liberals keep beating this dead horse. I think that it's pretty clear that this is illogical and not responsible governance.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of people beating things to beating a dead horse, we've got a tweet from Catherine McKenna on the same thing. She's so very worried about Canadians catching on to what's going on. She says, very worrying time for the Prime Minister to convene Canada's top climate scientists, including Hale, I don't know if I said that right, to give a science briefing to Canadians, invite the premiers to sit in the front row and stream to homes and schools across the country, where they peer our eyelids open. Basically, she's concerned that the article there, the article there, CTV says that, I think it was 3 out of 5 Canadians, if you want to put it back on in case I'm getting it wrong. Yeah, 3 in 5 Canadians attribute climate change and global warming to human activity. Well, you saw in that chart that I said there is a significant chunk where it is to human activity. That's not a conspiracy. We don't need to be peeled to our screens to watch the propaganda tube. And I know Alberta's premier has come out and said there's a lot that are even arson, let alone just, somebody flicking their cigarette or what have you. But it also reminds me, and again, we learned so much during the COVID time, especially when it came to censorship of the scientists, censorship of the doctors. But really, that was actually happening with the climate change stuff before it got really heavy with COVID. I can remember